This is the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is what most people think of when they hear the word Nintendo. It was the first home console from Nintendo, and anyone who grew up during the time can easily recognize it.
Nintendo.
It's a Nintendo?
Yes.
A Nintendo NES.
But in October of 1993, Nintendo released this console. Surprisingly, not many people know about this.
A bootleg Nintendo.
A bootleg Nintendo?
Yes.
I don't know, an adding machine?
What is this console? What is its story? Why is not much known about it? That's this week on The Gaming Historian. When the Nintendo Entertainment System launched, it revolutionized and revitalized the home gaming market. It was an amazing console. The control pad itself was something no one had ever seen before. Nintendo ended up selling 60 million units. To this day, it is Nintendo's best-selling home console of all time, and the third best-selling home console ever, only behind Sony's PlayStation and PlayStation 2. Then, in 1991, Nintendo unveiled the Super Nintendo to America. The 16-bit era was already in full swing, and the Nintendo Entertainment System was suddenly looking like an old system. However, many people still liked the original Nintendo. It was much cheaper than the newer systems, and it had a library of over 800 games. In 1993, Nintendo bid one last hurrah to its first system by releasing the NES 2 in October. The NES 2, sometimes known as the top loader, was designed by Lance Barr, the designer of both the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo. Barr claimed the boxy look was out, and I thought it was time for a more sleek and inviting look, and Barr was definitely right. Compared it to the older model, the NES 2 was much smaller and much lighter than the original Nintendo. Also, the power button was much similar to the Super Nintendo, in which you simply pushed the button up to turn the system on. The system had two controller ports just like the original, and all the old peripherals such as the Zapper Gun and the Game Genie also worked on the NES 2, although some users complained of problems with the Game Genie, but Galoob, the makers of Game Genie, quickly released an adapter to fix this issue. The controller, however, took a new design. It was changed to look more like the Super Nintendo controller with rounded ends, giving it the term Dogbone controller. The greatest improvement, and this one is obvious, is that the games load on the top now. Do you remember blowing into the cartridge, catching the game on the edge, pushing down repeatedly, only to have that stupid blinking light? This was due to a design flaw in the original NES, where when you pushed the game down, the pins that held the game would bend over time. The metal would also get corroded. This would cause the contacts not to read. The NES 2 did not have this problem, and the games were firmly seated in like the Super Nintendo, although it can be seated really tight sometimes, and it's difficult to pull the game out. It sounded too good to be true. This console should have been a hit. Unfortunately, it was not. Within a year, the model was discontinued, and the Nintendo Entertainment System's last game was made in 1994. So what went wrong? Well, as far as the system goes, there are a few flaws. For starters, there's no audio-video hookups. You can only hook up through an RF connection in the back. Second, there's no LED light. There have been several times when I simply forget that the system is even on. Another issue was that Nintendo games were meant to be inserted horizontally and locked down. Thus, some games could wobble and possibly distort the image. There are also lines going down the screen, which are faint, but are noticeable. The serial port was also removed from the system. However, the biggest downfall of the NES 2 was that it was released at the end of the Nintendo Entertainment System's life. The 16-bit era was well underway, and most people had moved on. Despite its flaws, the NES 2 is my preferred method of playing Nintendo games. simply because it works consistently. It is also much smaller and easily fits on my shelf. Back then, this thing sold for $49.99. That's cheaper than an Xbox 360 game. Most sell on eBay for around $70 to $150. However, I was able to get mine with 66 games for $40. Another friend of mine was able to get one with 25 games at a yard sale for $10. So don't give up hope, people. There's an NES 2 out there for you as well. If you have a chance of getting one, get it. It's well worth the money and a nice addition to any collection. Well, that about wraps it up. Time for a chapter review. Today we learned that in 1993, Nintendo released the NES 2, a newly redesigned model of the NES. The system was much lighter and smaller and came with a new controller. The games also loaded on the top and the pins firmly seated the games. However, the system lacked audio-video hookups, an LED light, and there were faint lines on the video. The system was soon discontinued, thus ending the NES's long lifespan. Well, that's all for this week in the Gaming Historian. If you have any topics you'd like me to cover, or questions in general, just email me, gameflop@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.